U.S. Intelligence Community, I beg your pardon. We also were privileged to have a guest host tonight, Mason Goad, who is also with the National Association of Scholars as a research associate. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be kicking back and letting Mason actually take the lead on this. And I'd just like to welcome the nearly 60 people who have come online already. And we're looking forward to having just a great discussion. So over to you, Mason.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Turner. So yes, my name is Mason Goad. My background before the NAS was in national security. And our guest tonight is Dr. John Gentry, a former CIA analyst with over a decade of service to the Central Intelligence Agency. Back in a few years ago, Dr. Gentry began writing some papers on the politicization of the intelligence community. In 2019, he wrote a paper in the International Journal of Intelligence and Counterintelligence on truth as a tool for the politicization of intelligence. Again, in 2020 on the new politicization of US intelligence. And then in 2021 on a paper that we will be discussing more in depth soon on demographic diversity and DEI in the US intelligence community. So Dr. Gentry, I'd like to just begin by asking you, how did you become concerned about the politicization of the US intelligence community? Was there a particular moment, or was it a gradual sort of awakening to this problem?
My moment of awakening, if you will, was soon after the 5th of August of 2016, when the former deputy director of the CIA, Michael Morrell, wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times that said, in part, "My training as an intelligence officer taught me to call it as it is. This is what I did for the CIA. This is what I'm doing now. Our nation will be much safer with Hillary Clinton as president." So basically what he did was enter domestic politics, something that was historically completely forbidden by the norms and ethics of the intelligence community. And he also misrepresented what he did. He was an advisor, not a decision maker, and he didn't recommend policies, including voting policies, to anybody. So this jumped out at me as being something radically new, very, very much different than the politicization that had occurred off and on in the past, and including the politicization that I myself experienced in the 1980s, when I was pushed to write in more critical terms of East European communist countries, not very sympathetic countries. I was pushed from the political right. This is coming from the political left. My thought then and now was that politicization of any sort is inappropriate. So I began to watch this, and gradually became concerned that something seriously was different and wrong, and began to write on it.
Yeah. So so the audience is clear, you and I have a very interesting dynamic, because you're a retired intelligence officer and I was going into national security. So this is my formal education, and that's the ethic that at least I was taught in my formal education, is you do not engage in domestic politics. You're an advisor, you report on the facts, and you let the facts speak for themselves. And if the policymakers want to disregard those, then, well, that's their prerogative. But and that was the reason that I became concerned in this topic on the politicization of intelligence, was watching the universities and the CIA early last year to promote overtly political stances in terms of recruitment and the consequences of doing so. So anyway, this paper that you wrote specifically on demographic diversity, can you tell me about that? I mean, I've read it, but for our audience members who haven't.
Sure. You mentioned the several pieces that I'd written earlier on various aspects of politicization. One of the claims that has been made by IC intelligence community leaders since roughly 2014-15 was is that diversity, equity, and inclusion not only is ethically good, but it also improves the performance of the intelligence community. My reading is that it only occurred after the initial claim that DEI is a good thing. It was because there were some criticisms that DEI had damaged performance. It had led to a poorer quality workforce. So starting in that mid-teens period, the IC began to say, not only is it ethically good, it is wonderful from a performance perspective. And that continued. It's still continuing. So I finally decided that it needed to be examined. And I, start off as you know in the beginning of the paper and say there are the two claims. It's ethically good, and it helps performance. And I'm looking only at the second claim. So what I decided to do then was to examine what some of the leaders of the IC, and particularly in the late Obama period. So that would be Director of National Intelligence James Clapper and Director of the Central Intelligence Agency John Brennan, decided to see what they had said, what others had said, and then to see whether there was information that we could use to test these claims. And what I found, basically, there was not a shred of evidence that supported their claims, and decided at the end of this that the rationale was pretty clearly political or ideological on the one hand, and for people who benefited from the program, it was a parochially valuable move. And it was especially, and I would emphasize this, is especially egregious from the IC's ethical perspective, because they've made a point in recent years, Clapper especially, the Congress before that, of saying that it's critically important for intelligence always to be based on solid facts. And yet they have been unable to identify even a single bit of reasonable evidence that the IC's performance is improved by DEI policies.
And if anything, there seems to be evidence that it may actually be hurting it, the performance.
Well, there is some, and I mentioned in the article that you note that we're talking about mainly, that there were some claims in that mid-2000 period that there was some damage. I stayed away from that in my paper for a couple of reasons. One, space constraint. This was a journal article, and then secondly, I didn't have a whole lot of evidence in hand. Didn't have enough evidence to be able to say flatly that there was a performance problem. Now, after that, or after this thing was published, I received quite a number of comments. All of the ones that I received personally, directly, were positive. There were some others that came through the journal that were not positive. But in addition to ones that just said, in essence, attaboy, great work, and similar sorts of things, some of them said, you're right, and not only that, there are performance problems, and let me tell you about ones that I know. So I've gradually collected more in the way of evidence that there are performance problems generated by DEI policies. I am working now on a project to document that. I'm still gathering evidence, but I've about reached the point where I'm persuaded on the basis of the evidence that I have that in fact it has damaged the IC.
Yeah. So I just want to wrap back on one of the things you said. From a younger perspective, it's very disheartening to be taught this ethic that you've adhered to, of telling the truth and sticking to the facts and not engaging in politics, and then to watch the senior leadership abandon that ethos completely. But I had a very similar experience. Last year, I wrote an article in Newsweek, a very simple opinion piece, where I explained that DEI was probably damaging national security. It was undermining it, not benefiting it. And I was expecting about 50-50% criticism on both sides. And that's not what happened. It was 99% positive feedback from people in the DoD, the IC, or Department of Defense, and the intelligence community, I should say. And it was an overwhelming amount of positive feedback on my end too. So that's actually quite something. I think that you can critique these and people agree, and the leadership doesn't seem to care. Yeah.
Well, leadership, of course, has bought the policies of Mr. Obama and now Mr. Biden, which are supporting these policies, and they're whatever they may believe, they clearly have a vested bureaucratic interest in towing the party line.
Yeah, for sure. And when you say that there's no evidence of demographic diversity actually benefiting the operational capabilities of our agencies, I just want to point out there was one article there was one part in your article that really struck me. The Government Accountability Office, which is a congressional research agency, basically. They investigate the executive branch and the policies and whatnot. And they conducted a study from 2019 to 2020 and found that out of the then 17, we now have 18 intelligence agencies, there were 12 of them that had made these claims that demographic diversity had benefited the operational capabilities. And out of those 12, 0 offered any evidence whatsoever of these. Yeah, which is really saying something when you have the majority of the intelligence community making these claims and not backing it up with any evidence at all.
And they really could. I mean, I'm more than aware of the importance of supporting and protecting sources and methods, and the standard concern of intelligence people. But there are lots of ways to tell stories that can protect sources and methods. You can sanitize things in ways that do in fact protect sources and methods. And I have yet to hear a single one of those. It's important. Let me make clear to the audience that I'm not talking about diversity of perspective or diversity of national origin. What we're talking about here is the policy, particularly of Mr. Obama, to generate domestically defined diversity. So we're talking about different groups defined within the United States.
Ethnic, racial,
gender, and physical handicaps as well. So there's actually an effort to hire more people with disabilities, and they use the convoluted logic that hiring more people with disabilities improves the ability of the IC.
Which doesn't seem to make any sense, because the skills that we know intelligence officers, operational and analytical, need have nothing really to do with race or ethnicity or gender or neurodivergence or physical handicaps or whatever else. It really seems to be their analytical ability. And you cover that in your paper, the various skills that one needs to be truly successful.
Well, there's a long literature on that goes back to the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services days, and the CIA in particular has long had the ethic that getting genuine diversity of outlook and diversity of background is a good thing. So what that means is that if you're interested in working the North Korea nuclear program, if you've got someone who's a Korean American who's native Korean speaker and so on, that's great. That's a form of diversity, but that's not the kind of diversity that we're talking about in DEI. We're talking about diversity defined as groups resident within the United States.
And then sending those people on that basis alone of this, racial diversity, purely racial diversity, not, oh, we have a Korean native speaker, but we have like a Korean and we're going to send him to work on this project, even though his background is in something completely unrelated just because of the fact that he's Korean. It doesn't make any sense at all. So if anything, it's detrimental, it seems. One of the things that really struck me in your article was you described the active measures, and that people are exploiting one of the things that make solid active measures officers. And active measures, for those of you who don't know, is something like kind of like propaganda to upset the political order in a country. But you had mentioned that an East German intelligence officer described an active measures officer, someone who's good at that, as being somewhat of an internal rebel and preying off of a society's weaknesses, exploiting historic traumas or past grievances or something like that. And one of the things that's so striking to me is to see how the ICs bought this up, where it doesn't appear to create collegiality. It appears to, if anything, damage the, how might we say, the collegiality of the intelligence community itself, while we promote people to positions that really have no business being there. And that's detrimental to operational success, not a benefit.
Well, I would say it is. If I might back up and go through this quickly, we'd certainly talk more about it if you'd like. But the term active measures, the concept of active measures, is a Soviet one.
Yeah.
It's roughly covert action, heavily involved use of disinformation, but also occasionally sabotage and so on. But the Soviets decided about 1960 that they would try to destroy the United States from within, that military victory was not likely to be cost effective from their standpoint. And so they launched a major active measures campaign that was designed in part to exploit what they considered to be America's single greatest political vulnerability, and that was its racial diversity. Yeah. So they saw it as a vulnerability, not as a good thing. And they worked very hard, starting from the early before that, but certainly as a formal program approved by the Politburo, the Communist Party Politburo, in the late 1950s, to generate dissension within the United States. So one of the core techniques of doing that was to break people apart, to create as many groups as you could, and to assert that there was oppression of some groups by nasty other groups. So what we've had, I think, is for a variety of reasons, and not least of which is Soviet efforts. We've had the accomplishment of what the Soviets tried to do 60 years ago in terms of balkanizing our people and our workforces within the federal government.
Looks like Mason might be frozen here. So I might follow up with another question then and fill in for him. I was kind of curious just listening to you talk. In what ways have you seen DEI, particularly in the federal workforce, in where you were working, and like how did they go about pushing those measures? I suppose would be the main thing. Was there mandatory classes or trainings that everybody had to go through?
Well, there's a lot of mandatory training. Goes back. This actually goes back a long time. You have black instructors of white managers who just give the managers what for, and say, you get this is what we're getting, get used to it. This is ostensibly an awareness kind of a thing. What has clearly happened since 2011, when Mr. Obama issued his executive order on implementing diversity and inclusion in the federal workforce, was that there are now offices, diversity offices in all of the federal agencies, including all of the IC agencies, that are charged with implementing these policies within the agencies. And there also are basically enforcement mechanisms. So if individuals, managers do not comply, there are mechanisms by which they can be punished bureaucratically. And this has worked its way down through the system to people who are, told you need to work this way. This is the way things are. If not, then you can expect to be punished. And I've had people say, well, I think one woman in particular who told me this in person, she said she felt intimidated. That's the word she used, intimidated. Nicholas Dumovich, who retired from CIA in 2016, is one of the few people who was willing to let his name be used on this. And he says that when he was in the director of analysis, the analysis director at CIA, that people referred to John Brennan's policies as, quote, soft totalitarianism. So
Right.
basically what you're pushing, you've got an administrative push, and you are imposing some degree of orthodoxy, and failure to comply with the standards of this orthodoxy will be career damaging.
Right. I would assume that would be evidence of compelled speech. Have you seen any evidence of people within the departments attempting to fight back, other than the one guy you just mentioned?
Not really. I mean, there are some cases in which people normally people don't fight back. Normally what they will do, and I've had half a dozen or so tell me this, they say basically that in the face of this, thinking again about Nicholas's soft totalitarianism, that what they do is be quiet. They shut up and they don't discuss. So basically this is again is a breaking of the bonds of the workforce.
Right.
One very senior CIA officer who's still working as a contractor here now said that in the current environment, you choose your close friends carefully. That's a direct quote. You choose your close friends carefully. So this in and of itself is problematic from the performance standpoint, because it's making people who should be working together closely as colleagues wary of each other. Now, can we quantify what this damage is? Can we say what this kind of thing did in a given operational environment on the one hand, or in a particular document that went to the president? No, we can't. But
Right.
It can't be helpful. Can't be helpful.
Well, yeah, sure, you can't quantify it, but I would think that in just any workplace, if there's something that is unspoken but can't be said, that can't be good for institutional trust, and particularly not trust between employees.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah.
So I got another. I keep getting these anecdotes, and I got a particularly interesting one last fall from someone at the State Department who told me something that I had not known before that. It turns out that Secretary Blinken has established what he calls a small steps program, which identifies specific activities that are consistent with Secretary Blinken's diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility (DEI) policy, and that for acting in appropriate ways, like for example putting pronouns after your name on your email signature block, you get points. And periodically there are awards ceremonies for individuals who are high point getters. And there also are at these award ceremonies awards given to groups, work groups that collectively have high point totals. So this is a way in which you can basically, in a minor way, award political correctness as defined by the small steps program. So this reminds me a lot. I ask you if this seems similar. It seems an awful lot like the Chinese social credit system.
Right. Yeah, it does seem very similar in that way.
And what my contact said was that just as I referred to these other people as saying you choose your friends carefully, what this has done at state, according to this person, is generate another variety of division. In this case, it's division between people who fully embrace DEI policies and people who are not as enthusiastic.
Right. Well, there's always a little competition between employee of the month, or in this case, I guess, DEI promoter of the month.
Well, but of course, employee of the month, at least, obviously there are political elements of that, but
Right.
at least normally there's ostensibly a performance element to employee of the month. That seems not to be the case in this points system.
Yeah. I was curious to know, do you know if the DEI initiatives, particularly in the intelligence community, how they've affected the way that they issue grants for new research and those types of programs, particularly thinking of DARPA or of InQtel?
No, I have not heard anything about that. I did have an interesting email conversation with somebody early in January. This is an individual who had and still does have quite a bit of contact with Studies in Intelligence, the journal that CIA has put out since 1955. And I said to this guy, given the way Director Burns is pushing the DEI line, don't you think that studies, as it's commonly known, don't you think studies is going to be affected? Is it going to be pushed to alter its editorial line, topics it covers, articles that are acceptable, and so on? And the answer was yes, probably will.
Right.
So this was perspective. He did not say that it happened already, but I can certainly see why and how this could happen in the future.
Right. All right. Well, I'm going to pass it over to Scott here. I'm going to see if I can help Mason get back online.
Yeah. I'm very sorry, John. We seem to have had an angry set of internet gods aimed at us. I actually had to go out to our communications tower to reset a few things before we could get back on. And I gather that Mason ran into a similar problem. Anyway, so I'm very sorry about the technical difficulties on that. But let's pick up. Chance is doing what it sounds like a really fine job in carrying on the conversation in our absence. Yeah, but you
Okay.
earlier in the discussion, you were talking about what's happened to the norms of unpolitical, not partisan norms and how you carry on intelligence. And of course, we've seen that this abandonment of norms is just incredible. It's happening in journalism. It's happening in science. And so it's almost like it's a mass hysteria. I mean, it's not just affecting the intelligence community, but of course it's affecting everything. And what's going on there? What do you think is happening? What's driving this in our society at large?
Well, good question. I've thought quite a bit about this and working on this on this book project that Mason mentioned earlier, and I think there are probably several factors. Now, I think that the Obama executive order in 2011 had a major impact. So that moved us from affirmative action, a little bit of preferences for favored groups and so on, to a firm push and punishments for people who did not comply. Secondly, there were some people in the IC, particularly Clapper and Brennan, as I mentioned, who were willing to help push this pretty hard. Thirdly, and this is a non-trivial factor, is that there was a big increase in the IC in terms of numbers of people after 9/11, and the agencies generally hired a lot of young people who brought with them the kind of political views that you all are familiar with in universities. So they tended to be receptive to pushes along the DEI line, and younger people in particular. And again, I owe this to Nicholas Dumovich. He told me this early, and I took it on board, but needed to be comfortable that he was right. And I think he is, that the bulk of the younger people are motivated politically by social goals. So issues of gender and race and sexual orientation and so on. And what happened putting all these things together was that when Mr. Trump became a viable presidential candidate, the people of the moderate left who were older and loyal to Obama, and particularly these being the older retired people, the formers as they're known in the intelligence world. So that would be Clapper, that would be Brennan, John McLaughlin, and a couple of dozen others who show up less frequently. That these people were actively pushing for sort of general, broad, philosophical sorts of reasons, and the younger people were doing it for the same sorts of reasons that young people are active at Disney and at Facebook and so on. And they came together. John Brennan at CIA has made it crystal clear. He's talked to reporters, and he wrote about this in his book. He said to the workforce before he left, it's your job to protect the progress that I have made. And if you do not see follow-on officials who are honoring this process, this progress, that it's your duty to fight them. And Brennan said Clapper said basically the same thing. So the upshot is you have a rationale on the outside pushing a political agenda, and on the inside it's coming from the social perspective. And these are not the same motives, but they're complementary. And both groups have the idea that they're not politicizing. That there's something, there was something bizarrely un-American, dangerous in Donald Trump, and that it was their duty, their perceived duty as self-evidently good people. Everybody knows that intelligence people are good people, just ask them, right? So they knew that they were good people. So since they were good people, they had a duty to warn the country as a whole, year after year, about the dangers of Donald Trump.
Yeah. I see Mason is back. Welcome back, Mason.
Yes.
The internet gods have not been smiling on us, but Chance stepped in and was doing a great job. So let's hand it back to you then.
Well, I'm not exactly sure where we left off in the information. Yes, sorry for my departure. I had to restart my whole computer after being booted off here. I understand you were too, Dr. Turner. So where were we? Talking about the norms changed and what happened under Brennan and Clapper, but I'm not sure all that I've missed. So,
well, Scott, what did we say that perhaps we need to, or what didn't we say that we need to follow on and give Mason some hints?
Well, you had some very interesting insights into the dynamics of what's driving this thing forward, and I think you mentioned that there's a new demographic of young people coming in who have a very different perspective on the United States and what's important to them, and then you had this kind of top-down political imperative from the executive branch, and somehow you ended up with some enforcers, capos, if you will, in the CIA who were going to implement that whole thing, and that's pretty much where I think we left off. But what's the obviously we have kind of a mafioso style culture growing up here, and I don't know, is that a fair characterization, or what do you think?
Well, I wouldn't say that, probably, although the term mafia actually has been used in this debate. Former FBI Director Comey and Deputy Director Andrew McCabe have used that to describe Donald Trump. There is the issue of whether there's a deep state or not, which might be getting to what you're talking about.
Yes.
So this topic has generated a lot of discussion, a lot of heat, not too much light, I think. My view on this, and for what it's worth, Department, is that we probably do have what arguably is a deep state, but not one of the sort that's in the literature. So traditionally, in the political science literature, you think of Pakistan and Thailand and Turkey sometimes, and some other countries, as having a security apparatus that operates independently of national leaders, legitimate national leaders, and sometimes uses violence against them, and is, generally speaking, looking out for itself in an ongoing situation. So my view, and again, this is subject to some discussion and debate, is that our version of that is primarily at CIA and in the ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, because of the relatively large numbers of people who have bought the DEI line. So the structure that we have, if there is a structure, so normally and historically, deep states have structure. Structure that we have is primarily appointed leaders and the diversity offices. The deep state does not actively fight all the time. It does not have members who line up on parade grounds and so on. But it can activate. It did activate in 2016. I would argue that Obama and Clapper and Brennan in particular helped build a deep state in the teens, in the Obama years. It activated in 2016 because Trump appeared to be a threat to the ideological interests of the deep state, not material ones, because Trump never threatened to cut budgets or anything. It was always a threat that there might be some change in political policies that would damage the kinds of policies that we've been talking about. So this deep state was active. Formers talking on MSNBC, writing op-eds in the Washington Post, and so on, and the internal deep state was acting through leaks, through proverbial water cooler banter, talking to the formers and having the formers act as mouthpieces for them. And they were pretty active throughout that 4-year period. They became quiescent in January of 21. They had a more pleasant, shall we say, person now in the White House, and so was no reason to be active. So they've gone inactive for a period, and I argue in this book draft that's coming up that it is not gone. It is strengthening. The organizational culture that's been strengthening for some time is continuing to strengthen, and I argue that we can expect to see it activate again if there's a political leader who the proverbial deep state people do not like, or the threat of a political leader who the deep state does not like. In the Trump case, we actually saw seriously active people, both formers and leakers, before Donald Trump was elected president in November 2016. It happened before he became president.
I'll just tack on to that very briefly. I remember being told later on in my educational, my education, that once you join the federal government, so long as you remained within the good graces of whatever agency you go to work for, and you didn't hold any political appointed position, you pretty much could never be fired. Basically, you had a job for life. And I think that's one of the reasons that people don't take the word deep state seriously, is it because it sounds almost conspiratorial, Illuminati-esque, let's say. But that's not the case. It's just permanent bureaucrats who all tend to have their political pieties, and they bring those to the job when they shouldn't. And that's a problem.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Mason, because there is a notion of the permanent government. There's a literature on this, and we know, for example, that J. Edgar Hoover was of the FBI was very keen on protecting the vested interests of the bureau. So the idea that bureaucrats would fight each other, and even maybe occasionally the Congress or junior politicos for purposes of generating organizational advantage vis-a-vis each other, a bigger budget, something along these lines. This is old, and I don't claim that's new. But I would argue that what we've seen in recent years is something well beyond that.
Yeah. We have an interesting question here in the chat from Andrea Hook. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, from the VA Eagle Forum. And Andrea asks, DEI and CRT are destructive within the military, but also having an impact on the ability to recruit in number and quality. How can this be undone, and how quickly can we correct course? Yeah. You want to give a shot at that?
That's a good question. The discussion about effects on recruiting in the military are pretty clear publicly, and I tend to be of the view that this probably the DEI policies and stand downs and so on are in fact affecting recruiting. There, in terms of the IC, I don't know, and the reason is that the intelligence people don't talk about recruiting very much. I do remember a briefing that I got from CIA people in 2019. Greg Treverton, who had been the chairman of the National Intelligence Council, had talked about how possibly dangerous this IC Trump controversy was, because it would prospectively affect recruiting. And the CIA people at that time said, no, it isn't. We're still getting lots of good recruits. Now, whether that's still the case, I don't know. But that's a good thing to be checking on, and that's something that the congressional committees should be able to get very quickly.
Yeah. Now, from the young person's perspective, I think it's extremely detrimental. I've talked to recently commissioned military officers and some intelligence officers within the Department of Defense who are very upset. And like I was saying earlier, before I was booted, you're taught this ethic to adhere to, that all of your colleagues are supposed to adhere to. And to get up to the professional level, where you're no longer just a student, or you're no longer in training, but you're actually going to go do this, and see that promotion is not based on that ethic, that your leadership is not adhering to that ethic, it's extremely disheartening. And I've had some of them say that, they worked since they were kids to join the military as officers. Now they're officers and they want to leave just immediately. And it's like, well, Nope.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. Just this past Tuesday, I was talking with one of my students, a graduate student, and she said she has friends in CIA and the FBI, and both of them are saying basically the same thing that you just said, Mike Mason.
Yeah. And you know, from
not more specific than that in our conversation, and I didn't press it, but she had a sorrowful expression on her face.
Yeah. I'll press it a little bit. From my perspective, it's extremely disheartening. You know, to know that I could go into this industry, and for the record, for those of you who don't know, to get into intelligence work is a lot. To even get the top secret, the TS/SCI clearance levels is a lot. It is a process of about 1.5 to 2 years on average. If you do foreign travel, it's longer. You have to go through interviews after interviews after interviews, and it is a lot of work just to get in the door. And from my perspective as a younger professional, I have to ask myself, is it even worth it? Because it seems like it would be a slow moving process to the ultimate termination of my employment. So why even bother applying in the first place? And those are the stories you're not going to hear, right? Because you can hear about the disaffected people who went for it, made it, and decided, hey, this is ridiculous. You won't hear about the stories of the people who never bothered because they were disinvited from the outset or disinclined from the outset. Yeah. So anyway,
let me make 2 other points, if I might, Mason, here, with time passing, that they're in the cost department. One of the core goals of Obama and his subordinate people, as many of them say explicitly, so Brennan and Clapper have said this explicitly in their writings, they were trying to change the organizational culture of IC agencies to get DEI in particular, but other things related, accepted. Well, we know from a lot of psychological studies and from case history of intelligence failures and successes that organizational cultures affect analytic performance. It affects questions that you look at. It affects how you address questions, from what direction, what facts are relevant, even definitions of what's good analysis, and so on. And some of the sharp people who have followed intelligence, including Robert Jervis, and now late Robert Jervis, Dick Betts, also of Columbia, have said, we've got a particularly Jervis, Betts a little bit less so here, and I have made the point that the purposeful change in organizational culture is generating biased analyses. So do we know the nature of these? Do we know how much of a push there is in what direction? We do not. You need really, at this point anyway, to be inside the IC. You need to be able to look at their actual products. But I have talked with some senior people in the IC, said, why don't you check this out? This is a legitimate thing to do. And the answer is too hot to handle. We're not going to do it. So even though there are these kinds of concerns expressed, not so much accusations, but concerns expressed, legitimate concerns, so far as I can tell, there is zero interest anywhere in the IC in actually examining this question. And then secondly, if you've got questions of analytic objectivity, then that leads to questions of objectivity and then trust. And my reading of intelligence business going back a long time is that if there is any single word that's most important in the intelligence business, it's trust. Intelligence works for consumers. If consumers do not have trust in intelligence, they will not use it. They will not use it. They'll talk to friends, they'll talk to the family, they'll read comic books. Adolf Hitler used to make decisions by looking at French and British movies. Not a particularly good method, but one that he did because he didn't trust his intelligence people. So I think there's a significant damage now having been done already to the intelligence community in terms of many people's trust of them. And since there was such a bias, in essence, for Hillary Clinton, for Biden, and so on, the people who are distrusting at this point are going to tend to be mainly Republicans. But they're not the only ones. So there's a huge perspective cost there that we don't know the magnitude of. My guess is that this will be assessed after the next, not if, but the next, when the next major intelligence failure is. And I certainly hope that the investigating commission that has access to IC people and their documents will examine this question. And I'll bet they will find something untoward and uncomfortable.
Yeah, the discussion is paralleling the kinds of destructive effects that DEI is wreaking on all kinds of things, and one of our questioners, one of the audience mentioned that the diversity, there's a good argument to be made that it actually erodes social trust between different groups rather than, provides different perspectives. But in academia, the interesting development there has been that the claims have been made that you have these different perspectives and that helps explore problems in different ways and whatnot. And again, there's no empirical evidence, credible empirical evidence that you can point to that actually bolsters that idea. And when you're faced with a failed theory, of course, the natural thing that happens is that it promotes kind of magical thinking. And so in the case of DEI, you imagine all kinds of imaginary things like microaggressions, like whiteness, white privilege, toxic masculinity, all these imaginary things that can help preserve the narrative. And of course, what's happening is that these people are putting on entirely different lenses to look at the world. And in academia, that's relatively harmless, but in intelligence, upon which the security of our country depends, having those kinds of lenses can be very, very dangerous. And I just wanted to get your perspective on and I think you answered it, that this lens is actually damaging our ability to actually analyze the world in ways that will protect us. And what we're going to end up with is we're going to be left tongue out to dry, a big intelligence failure, as you pointed out. But do you see people looking at it with this very different kind of lens now compared to when you were younger?
Let me give an example. So this is a volunteer, not an email. This is a personal conversation, and it was very sensitive and a lot of reading between the lines. So I'll leave out any demographic characteristics or where exactly at CIA this occurred. But this is a conversation I had last year. So this person said that in this person's area, that it's now pretty common for people who were not back up at CIA historically in all the areas. Managers have had significant responsibilities for keeping track of their people and for developing them. So they provide feedback, they provide constructive criticism, and so on. And then, of course, eventually that will turn into performance appraisals and awards and promotions and so on. All right. So what this person said is that what's happening fairly commonly at CIA is that people who are not favored, that is to say, not healthy males of European extraction, who receive counseling from their managers, and get criticism that they think is harsh, instead of taking it to heart and saying, okay, let me try to do better. They're going to the diversity offices and complaining. And the diversity offices, according to this person, typically say, well, it has to be discrimination. And so what they're doing is having the diversity offices, in essence, take the job that normally would be that of a more senior management, and they are entering the fray and criticizing immediate managers. So the result has been enough of these kinds of events so that managers, being reasonably smart people, CIA does not hire dummies. These people figure out what the incentive structure is. So what they're doing, according to this person, is no longer providing feedback, no longer providing constructive criticism. They are accepting shoddy work and rewarding it. So this person, as you might imagine, was not very happy with this state of affairs.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
I see that in the universities as well. You know, the people who are being recruited from these programs, the universities are accepting shoddy work in addition. But I want to circle back just briefly to what Dr. Turner's question about changing this frame. One of the craziest things that I've seen in the past 2 years was an event hosted by the Michael V. Hayden Center for Intelligence and Policy and International Security. And it was on political polarization and how to stop political polarization. And one of their key points in that webinar series was that if you want to stop politicization, you have to find a superordinate identity for people to rally around. So despite all their differences, you want to find something like we're fellow humans, or we're fellow Americans, or we're fellow intelligence officers or something. And you want to promote that identity above everything else. And DEI flips that on its head, where now the racial identity matters, the sexual identity matters, your gender matters, right? And one of the craziest things, though, was to watch these experts who knew this advocate for the promotion of a superordinate identity while they had promoted DEI and wouldn't speak a word of criticism against either George Mason University or the CIA. It's like, well, hold on now, you can't have this both ways.
Okay.
But
well, and the people who were there, are half a dozen senior people at the Hayden Center at George Mason in Arlington, Virginia, and they are all recent retirees from the intelligence community, and I think and all of them have been to varying degrees active in criticizing Trump publicly. So they're all actively politicizing intelligence. But you know, you talk about the groups. I remember, as showing my age here, in the 1980s in the Army Reserve, the point that was made to us repeatedly was that there's one kind of person in the Army: soldiers. That was it. And it was a very good armed force. But again, the sort of Marxian effort to divide and conquer has borne massive results, and it's generated groups. So we now have employee resource groups or affinity groups in the federal government. And I'm just looking at the 2019 ones on the NSA, the National Security Agency website. So there are 11: African American, Asian American, Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaska Native, American Veteran, English as a second language, Hispanic Latino, Islamic culture, NG, next gen. So that's a specific demographic group. Pride, the LGBT group, PWD, people with disabilities, and women. So all of those groups meet periodically and are there to protect themselves from Caucasian male oppressors.
Of course. Of course.
So turning to the Q&A, Mason, are there questions in there that you would like to pursue with John?
Let's see. There was one that caught my eye. Oh, yes. Nicholson asked, is there any evidence that our enemies are using DEI to infiltrate our intelligence organizations? My immediate response would be they don't have to, because so one of the things that Dr. Gentry mentioned earlier is that back in the 1960s, the Soviets, coming from the Politburo, decided to hammer hard on active measures operations. And that coincides with the start of the Long March through the institutions, which I encourage people to look up. That started as early as 1966 with Rudi Dutschke getting into correspondence with Herbert Marcuse, one of the founding figures of critical theory at the Frankfurt School, from which critical race theory was derived. One of his favorite students was, in fact, I think his favorite student, he stated it very clearly, was Angela Davis, the former leader of the Communist Party USA, or one of the leaders of the Communist Party USA. And that organization received copious amounts of support and directly collaborated with the Soviet KGB for decades. And I have written a paper on that for Mining the Campus. So to answer Nicholson's question there, my immediate response is they don't have to, because DEI began in those early movements. People trace it back very often to the affirmative action programs. But if you look at the underlying ideology, it goes straight back to the Communist Party USA. And in fact, the Communist Party USA, in an article back in 2021, they actually claimed critical race theory as their invention. They wrote this, and I mentioned it.
Communist Party USA was a very, very, very loyal party of Moscow. Yeah. So it took direction from the Soviet Union. So answer your question or address your question. I don't think that there's any new, well, not a major new opening for penetration, but I suspect that the services that fight CIA in particular on a regular basis, the proverbial intelligence wars, I suspect they're very happy about this. So they're seeing, in essence, unforced errors and destructive behavior, and they're hoping, undoubtedly, that it goes further.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all.
Bob makes an interesting comment in the Q&A. He thanks you for your insightful presentation. He mentions he lives in New York City, and he mentions that after September 11th, the NYPD went out to forge what he calls some very productive relationships with mosques, and we usually tend to think that these mosques are these hotbeds of anti-Americanism, but Bob makes the point that there was actually an influx of Muslims recruited in of
I think we just lost,
keep on top of the bad guys there. And so clearly there's good diversity and there's bad diversity, right? And he's interested to know, how do you distinguish between the good DIE efforts and the bad DEI efforts?
Okay, all right. The distinction that I make, and has been made, I think, repeatedly in the past, is that you want diversity of outlook and background. And if that comes from race and gender and national origin and so on, that is fine. But the core is that you want a wide range of skills that are useful for the intelligence business. Now, what's happened in the last decade here or plus in the United States is that DEI has been defined as a domestic political goal.
Mm-hmm.
So the Obama executive order was addressing diversity and inclusion in the federal government. It had nothing whatever to do with intelligence. It did not address the specific needs, which are foreign focused, of most of the intelligence services. So who is important which agency has an important domestic look? Well, it's Department of Homeland Security, it's the FBI. I mean, CIA does not, as a general rule. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency does not. NSA does not, for the most part. So what you're doing is imposing a domestic political agenda on the personnel needs of foreign-focused intelligence services. And what they have done, what the advocates of this have done, is take the literature, which, as Scott says, is not comprehensive, which says that DEI in corporate boards, for example, in some cases in corner offices and companies and so on, is associated with good performance, not causal relationship, not determined. But they basically made a two-step assumption here. One is that the association of domestic diversity in American businesses is causal, right? The association of good performance is actually causal. And then secondly, that domestic causal relationship can be picked up and moved to be relevant for foreign-focused intelligence services. And the logic is simply bad.
Yeah. Mason, I think you actually addressed this, but let me just make sure that you weren't answering a different question. So H. Nicholson asks, is there any evidence that our enemies are using DEI to infiltrate our intelligence organizations? Was that the question that you asked, Mason? Internet's been fading me in and out, so I may have missed that.
Yeah,
okay,
I think we asked something similar. That I have not seen anything there, but it's conceivable. But we've had a small number of penetrations in the past. Normally, the people who end up spying for other countries get disaffected while they're working in the intelligence community. So Rick Ames, Hansen, and so on. One recent story, Anna Montez just got out of prison. She was recruited by Cuban intelligence, and then, as I understand it anyway, was then told go work for DIA. So she volunteered her services, and the Cuban said, DIA is our choice for you to work for us. That's relatively unusual, but it's that concern that drives the kind of security processing that Mason was talking about at the beginning of our get together. Yeah, so it's a legitimate concern for the counterintelligence people of intelligence services.
Yeah. Now I will say, just as one last point, the first question that security clearance adjudicators ask is on allegiance to the United States. And that's literally point number one on the sheet, and is your allegiance to the United States. And DEI erodes that because it sees, the underlying ideology of DEI, postmodernism, critical theory, for instance, sees pretty much all of Western civilization as a power game that needs to be dismantled, decolonized, deconstructed, and whatever else. And so one of the things that's so baffling to me about this is how, and this goes to a point of Maja Nowitzki, I hope I pronounced that right, of how diversity officers and officials are evaluated, and who would be qualified. That's another question in the chat. I have no idea, because from all that I've seen about DEI, it's a very anti-Western and especially anti-American ideology. So how these people are getting into the intelligence community based on the allegiance to the United States, I really don't know. I mean, I know most of the people would probably say well, that's more like foreign influence, you know, do you have any foreign ties? But still,
Well, I think the people who are doing this, the diversity offices and so on, don't see this at all. They've got, you know, think of it from their perspective. They've got a presidential order
yeah,
from Mr. Obama. They got another big one from President Biden in June of 2021. The order is to hire and promote more non-European men. They're just doing their job. They're measured by how many more people of the favored groups they can get into the organization. There is no statement anywhere about how much diversity is enough, what kind of diversity is enough. More hiring of favored demographic groups is always better. We're now at CIA, over the organization, last I heard, is slightly over 50% female. And Director Burns is still pushing hiring women like it's you know, the most wonderful thing in the world. I saw a thing he wrote less than a month ago. He's still pushing it hard. So that's how you rationalize this. You're doing what your superiors have told you to do, and it's just self-evidently to them good from the ethical standpoint. And besides, the bosses are saying do it.
Yeah. No, it's the I'm following orders sort of excuse.
Well, and that's a wonderful rationale for bureaucrats generally.
Yeah.
I remember working for a government person.
I think I'm
working with a government person, not for, happily. I remember thinking that, boy, this person could have worked for Joe Stalin's security services in 1937.
Yeah.
I keep fading in and out of my internet connection here, but in the few moments of clarity that I think I might have here, Richard Allen asks or mentions something that I think is germane to one of the points you were making, John. He says the difference, he quotes a book by Scott Page, The Difference, How the Power of Diversity Creates Better Groups, Firms, Schools, and Societies. And then Hal Arks comes in and endorses that. He says, Page, who has written the text on diversity, emphasizes that diversity of viewpoint and skills is critical and not diversity of skin color or other demographic characteristics. I'm sure you're familiar with Scott Page's book or work, and you know, to what extent has he influenced your thinking on this?
Well, I must say I haven't read that.
Oh,
but
okay.
You know, what is clear
Mm-hmm.
is that diversity of perspective and experience, that means education, you know, background, travel, and so on, that is critical. If you can get it by getting different demographic groups, that's fine. But the goal should be getting good people from different backgrounds. Yeah. The problem, again, from my perspective, is you're not caring about that. You are trying to get people who look like America, not think like somebody else's country. So, you know, if you're in the intelligence business, you want people who look like Yemen, who look like Thailand, who look like Korea. You don't want people who look like Philadelphia.
Did I cut out again? Oh, there I am. Am I back?
Yeah.
I'm back. All right. I don't know what I missed, but yeah, the viewpoint diversity of experiences matters a lot. And one of the really interesting things that I've seen as the younger professional is they're really looking for skills, or at least they were looking for skills, because you might have something very random that comes in handy someday, or have been to a place that, you know, makes you top notch. There's an old quote, I'll probably misquote it, but it was something of the sort that if you ever hear about a language you've never heard of before, if you can learn to speak that language, you have a place in the intelligence community. If it's something that no one learns, then you're really desirable because there's no one in the community that knows it other than you. So, you know.
Well, in general, I think that's right. I mean, and different agencies have different tolerances for focusing on long-term issues as opposed to the hot topic of the day. But in general, I mean, certainly some of the agencies like a broad bunch of skills, because they never know when the next crisis is going to, when and where the next crisis is going to show up, and they know they can't make skills instantly. So they try to have people who monitor much of the world on a continuing basis, even if there's not a crisis, which is smart.
There are several related questions that I'm just going to kind of summarize if I can. You know, there are several people who've asked in different ways, how do you turn this whole thing around? And you know, to be fair, intelligence failures are not something new or that have come under the DEI realm. And so how do you, well, I mean, I'm sure everyone wants to not get things wrong, clearly, because that's a failure. But what are the safeguards for trying to catch those intelligence failures before they go out of control? And in the case of DEI, if those are a particular form of blinders, just how do you turn this around?
Well, good question, and that's a particularly important question because the intelligence community tends to be pretty insular. You don't get large numbers of people who coming in, and CIA in particular is famous or infamous for being resistant to outsiders. But some things that might help. You have leaders who emphasize these things. Including presidents. You have an executive order that abolishes all of the DEI training programs. You abolish the diversity offices and go back to much smaller affirmative action offices. You have an investigation through inspector generals or other organizations within the agencies. There are some to take a look at what the nature of the problem is. You can identify some of these issues and address them to some degree. Another possibility that I think is likely is to exercise presidential authority in altering Executive Order 12333. Nice, easy to remember executive order that's been modified several times. President Reagan initiated it in 1981, but it is the presidential statement of what intelligence agencies are supposed to do and not do. It's actually public document. You can find it on the web. So if you find organizations that are unwilling to change, then you have a reissue of Executive Order 12333, and you take responsibilities from recalcitrant agencies. You take money from recalcitrant agencies. These people, the leaders of these places, are bureaucrats. Nothing gets a bureaucrat's attention faster than a loss of turf and money. And if that doesn't work, then you do it again. And if that doesn't work, then you go to Congress to request an even bigger cut. And a final thing that seems to me a possibility. If you can't get good solid information from the line analytic units, is to create a new small intelligence organization on the National Security Council staff. We actually had a similar sort of thing briefly in the Nixon years. And the British and the Australians have a similar sort of an arrangement. The British version is the Joint Intelligence Committee, started in 1936, which is a small group of intelligence analysts and policymakers who are in the office of the Prime Minister. So these are the people who prepare what in our system would be these people who prepare what in our system is the President's Daily Brief. So if you cannot get performance from these agencies, then start hitting them bureaucratically where it hurts in terms of money and responsibilities, and therefore social standing within their peer groups and so on. So will this work? Well, I wouldn't bet the ranch on it, but I think you can move in the right direction.
Okay, Mason, do you have any final thoughts on our conversation tonight?
I'll just tackle on from the young professional's perspective and share some advice that General Michael Hayden gave to me and my classmates about a year ago or a little more than, which is simply tell the truth. Really, that's what the job is. You tell the truth and you stick to the facts. And I've seen a lot of people who are afraid to do that when that's actually their job. I've heard stories of people going to their supervisors or their commanding officers to complain about these DEI places and have been sort of taken to the side and said, if you do this, you're going to be marked and your career is going to end. It's like, yeah, well, do it anyway, because somebody has got to speak the truth. There are enough lies in the intelligence that the intelligence community deals with for the officers to be lying to each other, right? So I'll just leave it at that.
On that pessimistic note, I think we're approaching the end of our time here, and I'd just like to read one of the comments in the chat, and then I'll just ask you, John, for your final thoughts. So I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this correctly. Tretioshu, I believe. He says, obviously, we all are Americans, and we need the best qualified Americans for all positions, public and private, as well. How demeaning to minorities or women to simply assume they need the government to help them rather than them helping themselves to be the best that they can be. And I think that's a very insightful comment. John, do you have any last thoughts?
One if I might respond to this. I taught one of my many sources, fairly recently retired, quite senior female operations officer at CIA, and she said she's skeptical of this because it raises questions about the preferences that have been given to women for the last 10 years. Lead to questions about how she got where she did. And she maintains that she did it the old-fashioned way by working hard, working well, working in unpleasant places, and she earned it. And then the DEI is actually damaging her reputation. But as a final thought, if take you up on that, this is an ongoing issue. It's an important issue in the IC. We don't really know the full implications of it, as Mason's talking about. I think there's lots and lots of circumstantial evidence and a little bit of hard evidence that we've got a serious problem here. But the Biden administration is not doing anything on it. They're denying that there is a problem. So it looks to me like we're not going to have a significant addressing of this issue for at least another 2 years.
That's frightening, I have to say. Okay, well, we've approached the end of our time. John, thank you so much for your insight and your willingness to talk to us. Mason, thanks for doing a bang-up job on guest hosting. Let me just mention give a plug for the next Restoring the Sciences webinar, which will be on the 17th of February, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And our guest on that episode will be Dr. John Armstrong, who is a mathematician, and he'll be talking to us about the sinister attempts to decolonize mathematics, of all things, I would add. And so I just want to end this webinar, again, sponsored by the National Association of Scholars. Two other comments came in very quickly, and I'd just like to end on those notes. One person says, without courage, no change. And then another person, Matt Lynn, says, Solzhenitsyn said it well, from within the beast, live not by lies. And on that note, I will bid goodbye to everyone. Thank you, John. Thank you, Mason.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you in the next Restoring the Sciences webinar on the 17th of February. So good night, everyone.